Welcome back to the garden tour. Coming through this gate on the where the chain link fence is on the neighbor on this neighbor's side. We've covered this side in the last video, in the last couple videos actually, and we wrapped up over there with a vegetable garden because it's all these 100-degree days have really added up on the vegetable garden over there. This side over here we'll call the screen, and so this is the only place we really have intentionally planted some tall things to kind of block the backyard space of the between us and the neighbor. There's a hosta that starts this little line. We use wood chips in the paths out here, and so the wood chip path starts off very narrow at the gate and then gets a little wider as we go, so we had to put some small things in here. But this hosta is called Jet Stream. You can see it's in full bloom now. A lot of the other hosta out here are newer planted than that one, so you can see, you know, after a year or two, how much bigger, better, fuller the hosta are in the garden. And there's a bee pollinating that one that's closest to you right there, Steph. There it is. Oh, there it is. So you don't think about hosta as pollinator plants, but there's a native bee on a hosta out here in the garden. Some hosta are fragrant, some aren't. I actually haven't smelt that one. That may be. The next little group after the Jet Stream hosta is this Amaryllis cluster. Basically, we take our Amaryllis that we buy kind of pre-treated and grow in the house as decoration during the Christmas season. We come out here in the spring and put them in the ground, and so this has become our little collection of Amaryllis. It actually takes a minute for these things to establish themselves in the ground. They do like well-drained soil. They probably like a little more sun than they're in this spot. This spot has heavy root competition from the red bud that's next to it, and a maple out there in the front garden and several other things. And I think that keeps it well drained enough in our clay soil to do Amaryllis okay. Probably would prefer overall better draining soil for those big giant bulbs, but you can see they're doing just fine. Got another flower spike coming on this one. This will be the kind of the timing in the ground. The ground timing is going to be different than we think about normally we grow them. They've been held in kind of stasis, so they're bought during the fall and winter and grown inside for some winter color, but out in the ground they'll bloom in the mid to late summer like this. There are a few begonias along here, and we have fertilized most of the annuals in the ground a second time using some liquid fertilizer, but I have obviously missed a couple of these begonias back here in the back garden. They haven't grown. They've grown, but they haven't grown as much as we probably would have liked. But when we do so many annuals out here, it's easy to miss. It's easy to miss something. We don't do a whole lot of fertilizing, but these could. This is what I'm looking for when I'm talking about. I fertilize based on observation. Here's my observation. It's July 15th and these begonias haven't grown very much. I should have fertilized them more, or should fertilize them at this point. So that's what I'm saying about observation, as opposed to my vegetable garden, which we've never refertilized the entire season because it was just growing like a weed. I mean, we have piles of produce in the house and have been giving it away. This Alyssium is called Gray Ghost. We've shown it quite a bit over the years. It's really struggled in its first year in the ground with all this root competition over here. Same as another Alyssium that we'll show later. A couple other Alyssium really struggled being dry for the first year or two. But once this thing's rooted in, this is probably the driest spot. Well, everything along this border from the front to the back is the driest place in the garden. And it's also the kind of the highest place in the garden, although there's not a lot of fall to this garden. It is a little higher here than it is out in the front. And this Alyssium has kind of a pinkish flower on it. If you've seen Alyssium flower, they have almost like a little alien looking, it looks like something that would live in the sea is what the flower kind of looks like. They're interesting. They're amongst the earliest plants to have evolved, earliest flowering plants to have evolved. And it's a very interesting flower, but Gray Ghost has this gray-blue coloration on it. Really pretty plant. It went through, again, it got smaller the first year because it was so dry, and now it's come back out of that. And I think next year this thing really is going to take off. It takes a minute, you know, it took a little while for it to get going. Holly's doing a good job this morning of finding her way onto the to the camera. These hot, really, we've had these crazy hot mornings. So she gets a little while outside, and then I have to put her in. She's almost 16 years old. This Osmanthus is called Apricot Echo. It's an orange flowering Osmanthus fragrance, but I really don't know that this thing is the best of the orange flowering Osmanthus. It does flower orange, but it's not particularly showy. There are a couple others that are a lot more showy overall than this. I do like it's shady, a little shadier over here than it would want to be, but I've pruned off the top of it, and I've shown that like two springs in a row. I've shown pruning the top, and now you can see how much fuller it is down at the bottom. With leafy evergreen plants like this, you really are in control of them. You can prune off the top. This thing blooms in the fall and blooms in the very, very late winter, early spring. As soon as that's done, you can off with its head and get new growth to fill out down below. All the new growth on this plant has this kind of burgundy reddish color. It's growing a tiny bit now, but it's midsummer, so it's kind of settled into mostly green at this point. It's a great looking plant. It does flower. They are orange, and we'll have the regular Osmanthus fragrance back here coming up that I think is overall more flowers, overall more fragrant. There's a Japanese anemone down here, and we have one out by the street that's a total bully. We showed it off. This one is also a bully, but it's a bit more contained where we have it, so it hasn't been able to run around as much. And this one has a much showier flower on it, big white flowers. The one out front has it's interesting flowers, but they're not particularly showy to me, in small little clusters. This one, when it flowers, is really quite showy. Foliage is great, texture is great. You know, it's a nice looking ground cover, but be careful. Japanese anemones can definitely take over. I was up in Columbus, Ohio at Ohio State's Trial Garden the other day, and there was probably the size of this entire back garden back here. Japanese anemone had run through it. It just absolutely taking over the world. And now Holly's kind of got me trapped here. This is cleyera called Juliet, and we had in the 2 videos ago we showed off Romeo. Juliet looks. Romeo has a hard outside yellow edge on both sides, where this one has more of an off-white, and this one also has a little additional coloration in the middle of the leaf. I love this plant when the new growth has this kind of pinkish hue that shows up in it, and then it settles into that kind of off-white color. Great plant. It's a little slow to get started. These variegated plants are going to be somewhat slower to get going, but now look at it. I mean, now it's, you know, right at tipping out at 5 feet tall. I'll take some of the height out of this. It gets a little sunnier toward the middle of this screen, and you can see these plants are quite a bit taller, and then it's shadier back the other way. So this one's still in a hair too much shade, so it's stretching. You can see the thinner growth up here on the top, but as soon as we come out of winter, I'll just cut this at this height, and then the whole plant should catch up. And I think next year, you know, it'll be 6 or 7 feet tall. It finally got itself rooted in. Once we get to this point on these leafy evergreens in Raleigh, we don't really have to do any ongoing water on them, and watering unless it's really abnormally dry. We have a lot of dahlias in the garden. We haven't seen a dahlia yet, but we're going to see a lot of dahlias in the next few videos. Some of these we do from seed, and these were just planted back here behind these shrubs to give us some height while we were waiting for the shrubs. And you can see that's one of the ones that we collect the seed on these, and when we germinate them, they come up all kinds of different colors. I also wanted to point out that there's a smilax vine in this Osmanthus. I forgot to point it out. See this vine right here? These grow wild in the woods. They have big giant tubers under the ground, a bulb-like structure under the ground. This smilax has been here since we started this project. It is a giant tuber, and somehow we have not been able to get rid of it completely. And every time we turn our back, the smilax can grow. You know, that's probably 9 feet of growth it's put on since we noticed it coming up through the middle of the plant. It's just one of those plants. It's kind of hard to get rid of it. This is a Chinese Snowball viburnum, and we got another one of our nemesis on it. I'm noticing right now. This is Steph's absolutely favorite vine here.
That's sarcasm.
Yeah, that's sarcasm. Yes. Oh, I stepped on Holly's tail by accident. I'm sorry, girl. I'm sorry. This is porcelain vine, and porcelain vine, you'll see it mostly, we'll have them near the edges of the fences, anywhere the birds can sit. You know, they eat them, and then the seed, you know, they poop the seed out, and here we go. And then they grow up through the plants. And so sometimes we don't see them until they're this large. A lot of times we'll see this little bit of variegation. Some sort of variegation in them, and I always wonder, you know, can we release a variegated porcelain berry out to the world? I'm sure the world would love it. Steph's making a face over there. But again, I didn't get it. It breaks off. Once it gets this rooted in, it just breaks off. It's hard to get that thing out of the ground, and it's in the middle of that plant, in the middle of that cleyera. Again, this is the Chinese Snowball viburnum, and it's budding up. It will bloom here in the next couple of months when it cools off, once we get some cool nighttime temperatures. I tree formed this last year in a video, and then I tried to kill it by tying it up for too long in the same spot, and but it's overcome that. It's overcome Jim's abuse, and it's looking pretty good. I'll need to go up in here in the late winter. It's going to bloom in the fall, and then it's going to bloom again in the early spring. And after it blooms in the spring, and it has inflorescences this big, you know, big round balls. This is when we think about Snowball viburnum, it's the Chinese Snowball viburnum that most people are thinking about in their minds. There is a Japanese Snowball, there is an Eastern Snowball as well, or European Snowball. But this is the one people are really thinking about because it's got the big giant, you know, big giant beautiful flowers. But I'll get up in here in the late winter and do a little bit of pruning, get some of these crossing branches taken out, and clean up the bottom. It's got some suckering down at the bottom as well, but it's on its way. I mean, this thing it's gone. It was a 1 gallon container 2 years ago. And I had one branch on it, and I cut everything else away, staked it up. Last year got it up to about here, and now it's 10 feet tall, but I'll probably reduce a little bit of that height when I do my spring pruning on it. But here it is. We have a mood ring Podocarpus that we actually moved from the other end of this screen, and it's pretty tall, you know, 6 feet tall, and we moved it right before we went into a terrible drought and terrible summer conditions. But it was in too much shade on the other end, and I kept having to prune it to keep it full. Over here, this is about the spot where it gets quite a bit more sun out from under that red bud. So I think it's going to be quite a bit fuller, require a little bit less overall maintenance to keep it full. It has reached 6 feet tall. I've sheared it a bunch of times to make it happen. Mood ring, it's called mood ring because the new growth on it is pink and several other colors before it settles into this green. Podocarpus is a great screening plant. We've already seen Roman candle Podocarpus, and now this is mood ring Podocarpus. They're just great southern conifers to use as screening plants or in various highlights in the garden. There's different size ones, different variegated ones, just kind of interesting there. Down here, there's a Zenobia. This is called Woodlander's Blue. It's a native plant. We had, you see this blueberry like fruit on it because it is related to blueberries, and it has that same kind of, it's still got a few flowers on it. It gets kind of a dangling raceme of white flowers that hang down similar to a pieris, but the individual flowers kind of look like blueberry flowers, and it has this kind of dusty blue leaf on it. Really interesting native plant, and this one was selected again because of this blue coloration on it. This hosta is called Hans. You can see how colorful that one is. It should come up quite a bit bigger next year. We've got a complementary gold foliage one that has a similar size leaf on the other side of this that we'll see in just a few minutes. Underplanting the Zenobia and some black scallop ajuga. The ajuga is obviously permanent, and the Tyrannia is temporary, and we'll do that a lot. We'll wait for something to grow and fill in. So there's kind of 3 stages of growth to this area. We've got the Tyrannia as an annual flower. The ajuga will eventually occupy that space that it's in, and then this Zenobia at some point will be big and tall, and it will probably shade out some of this stuff underneath it. So there's always, staging here to keep the ground kind of covered. By keeping the ground plain covered, we don't really have as many weeds. We still have weeds, Holly was over here eating crabgrass just a second ago in the bed. So we do have a few weeds, and you've seen a few weedy vines that we have that are gifts from the neighborhood and the birds. But for the most part, we have very few weeds out here. A lot of that's done with the mulch, and then keeping the ground pretty well covered helps with that as well. When we started this project 3 or 4 years ago, one of the few places I could just put the camera on a tripod and have a conversation, you know, question and answer or whatever, was right here, where I could, you know, these things grew faster and were established faster. Now we can there's pretty much no place in the garden that doesn't look pretty good as a background where I could stand. But for a long, this is a very familiar background area for people who've watched the channel. But again, now the whole thing is kind of filling in enough where we can do, I can move about the garden. This St. John's wort is called Brigadoon. This gold St. John's wort, it's, you know, asked about all the time on the channel. It's once a year we mow it to the ground in late winter. Literally, you can use the lawnmower or a weed eater or pruning shears, doesn't matter what you use to do it. All the new growth comes out, kind of that pinkish hue to it. Then it settles into gold. By late summer, you'll lose some of that chartreuse color, gold color, and it'll be a little on the greener side. It does bloom like other St. John's worts, but very sparsely. And Steph's looking for one right now. Very, very sparse bloom on this one. But when you do get the yellow flowers, the bees love them. The bees kind of go wild for the flowers. There's something about it. There's some sort of chemical in them or something that makes them just go kind of just around the flower as fast as they can go. It's really strange to see. I don't know, again, I think it's some sort of chemistry that it's using against the bees to get pollinated in some way. There's a variegated ground orchid here. This is a Blatilla. We've got another solid green foliage Blatilla coming up. And did we pass one? It must just be the one on the other side over there. I thought we had actually passed one. The Blatilla will bloom in the mid to late spring, where we're at a plant symposium thing, and Amanda from the Atlanta Botanic Garden, who we have had on film before down at the Atlanta Botanic Garden, did a talk on all the hardy orchids, the orchids that we can grow in the ground outside up here in colder areas. Interestingly, the orchid family, the Orchidaceae, and the aster family are arguably the 2 largest plant families on Earth. But the weird thing about orchids, on asters, we're going to show you like 100 asters in this garden, or less than that, but a lot of asters. We're only going to show you a couple orchids because most of the orchids are tropical. So it's a big giant plant family, but we don't get to grow very many of them, although we do have a few native spring ephemeral orchids in North Carolina. And we're going to add some more orchids to the landscape. That's the point of all that. After hearing her, and all the trialing that they've done at the Atlanta Botanic Garden on different orchids, which ones would come back and which ones wouldn't. I mean, it's a big trial of lots of different orchid species. So we are definitely going to add some more interesting orchids to the garden over the years, and they're perfect plants to tuck in places. A Distylium back here called Bayou Bliss. It is probably, I've got to get this St. John's wort out of it just a little bit here. It's eating a couple places. This one has good new growth color, that kind of pinkish color, burgundy color that a lot of Distylium get, but this is definitely the lowest growing, easiest to control Distylium on the market, I think, currently right now. It's just such a great dwarf, compact, leafy evergreen plant, and possibly the most floriferous. The flowers occur on Distylium along the stems in the early spring, late, really almost still winter when it happens here. And those flowers aren't the showiest things, but this one right here, when it's in flower, it's in flower. Every stem is covered in red frilly flowers. It's in the witch hazel family, and Loropetalum coming up in a second. It's also in the same plant family for these two. This is an Osmanthus fragrans. There's 3 of them in the line. This is just straight Osmanthus fragrans. It'll start blooming about the 1st of October. We'll get a few flowers on it by late October, a lot of flowers. The peak of the winter will slow it down. So sometime from Christmas to the end of January, we won't have any flowers on it. And then as soon as the nights warm up a little bit, you'll immediately start getting some more flowers again. Great evergreen shrub, not the most cold hardy thing in the world. You definitely want to be in zone 8 to have them out on the edge of your property. In zone 7, you definitely need them in a protected space out of the winter wind. And again, once they get to this size, they'd probably be hardy regardless out in zone 7, but you have to get them to this established. Great leafy evergreen plant, and it can be reset. You know, one of the things about these leafy evergreen plants that make them such good screening plants is if something goes wrong, I can just cut it in half and it'll just grow right back from that, quick and easy. Anyway, I love this plant. And it's like really, really important in Chinese culture. And I think it's called guihua in Chinese. And when I was at the farmer's market, it was always amazing because someone who was new to the country in some way didn't realize they could grow this thing here, and they got really, really excited to realize that they could grow Osmanthus and even collect a lot of different kinds of Osmanthus here in the States. This Loropetalum is called Carolina Midnight. We've got dwarf Loropetalum that'll come up in the video later. This one is definitely one that's going to get big. I highly encourage you to make sure that the Loropetalum you're buying is going to fit the space that you want it in, because they can grow with such speed that they can be annoying if they're in the wrong space. I mean, like 5 and 6 feet in a month or two. I could cut this thing to here in the middle of July and it'd be back to there by the time it was going to, by the time the cold was coming in the fall. This one has the color is really good through the whole plant. This was one of the things that was missing in Loropetalum 15 or 20 years ago, is that we had the new growth was purple like this, or some sort of color in the new growth, but then the old growth would settle into green. And so it didn't really hold that color at all. But through plant breeding now we can see that purple coloration, even in the heat of the summer here. This thing still is purple all the way through the entire plant, even in the parts of it that are shaded down below. And it gets those little frilly flowers on it in the spring, and then in the fall, it'll get a few more additional flowers. But again, it's in that witch hazel family, so it looks like little spidery flowers dangling down from it. I put the patio in just over the course of a month and a half ago or so. Got this the brick edge in, and we recycled bricks from the garden that had been buried all over the place. It's so funny. I thought I had used up all the bricks at the end of this, and now we've now found more bricks since these bricks. But with a crispier edge here, it really allows us to show some things off around the edge of the path and have the paths come into it in various ways. So it just looks neat, but it's all kind of natural materials. This was one of the most asked about things in the garden. They look a little rougher than they did during the open garden, which was a month ago today, I think, something like that, or almost a month ago. This is red vein sorrel, and we grow regular sorrel over here, we'll see, but the red vein sorrel we're growing for decoration. And again, it looked a lot better a few weeks ago. It will die to the ground in the dead of the winter, and just come back up beautifully fresh in the spring. It just looks incredible for several months. And then Steph will get the flowers out of them because they're trying to flower throughout the season. She just keeps taking the flowers out as they try to flower. They'll look a little fresher in fall. They'll actually put on a little bit of new growth before that shot of frost or freeze that knocks it completely back to the ground. But it's just great looking ornamental perennials. And again, we grow the regular green sorrel as for eating, and then we grow this purple vein sorrel for decoration, really. And keep in mind, a lot of the things you're seeing we grow from seed here. I should be pointing that out more as we go, because I want to make sure that folks understand that a lot of the things that you see in this garden we are growing from seed, and some of these things we're actually collecting the seed ourselves here in the garden. We try to do this. This is a big time color display. I mean, if you've followed along from this front part through this is a lot of flowering things in this garden, and we've tried to do it as inexpensively as possible over time. Even a lot of the perennials you're seeing were actually done from seed here, including the red vein sorrel. They're impatiens behind it. It's the first year we've done impatiens in this space. I don't remember what was here.
White impatiens.
There were white impatiens here last year. Okay, so this is the second year we've done impatiens in this space. So they just changed from white to pink. That's kind of funny. There's a purple sweet potato vine in it as well, and then some crabgrass. If you want some, want to see the crabgrass Holly was eating right here. I need to pull that out. There's actually a couple of plants. There's some crabgrass that snuck in there. Again, when you don't cover every spot, you're gonna get some weeds for sure. That you can see the candelabra. This was Steph's mother's candelabra. It was on their dining room table when she was a kid, so we brought it out here. She painted it. I drilled a few holes in those little cups to make sure water can get out of the little cups, and then we added some succulents to it. Just another little detail out here in the garden that those kind of little details and those kinds of stories are important to us. There's a variegated toad lily that it's newly planted into this space. I got to make sure that the St. John's wort doesn't end up doing any damage to it. But we'll see another toad lily, I think, on the back line back there as well. But this is a variegated one. There's kind of a crooked container back here in the bed. I need to actually straighten this thing out. It's been crooked since it went in, and I haven't taken the time to straighten it out yet. There's a lamiastrum coming over the edge, and it's trying to root into the ground, which I don't want it to do. So occasionally with these vining things that come out of your containers, we'll just come over here and give it a haircut like this. That'll actually help it fill in the container and prevent it from rooting into the ground. But make sure you're walking around your garden. If you have those things that come down off the side of your containers, especially things like mint, some sedums can get super aggressive. Dichondra can really get aggressive. So if you've got Asiatic jasmine, periwinkle, any of those Vinca minor, any of those things that have made it to the ground, give them a haircut, back up the pot a bit. Because again, right when I pulled that out of the ground, it was starting to try to root into there. Then this is a soft caress mahonia, and it looks great in this container. It's mahonia that's soft to the touch. Showed it quite a bit on the channel over the years. But the nice thing about this one is it's gotten to the point where it's got a lot of new growth. You can see mahonia grow in like a bamboo type style. They're in the same family with nandinas, and nandinas will grow like this as well, just kind of multiple spiky pieces coming up. They're also in the barberry family. Some barberries will do that as well. But once you get all these kind of canes coming up on them like this, every one of those is going to end in flowers in the winter time. So this mahonia will bloom. This will be the heaviest flowering we've seen on this soft caress mahonia this year. And they bloom at a time when there's not much else for the bees in the garden. And so the bees, if the bees are if it's a warm day and the bees are able to be active, they'll be all over this soft caress mahonia in late January into February for our area. Great plant, not quite as cold hardy as some other mahonias. A lot of mahonias are zone 6 hardy. There probably is even a zone 5 hardy mahonia in the Pacific Northwest, but this one's definitely like zone 7. There's a bunch of these lake series of salvia coming up in the next few videos. This one's Lake Titicaca. They're all named Lake something. Great looking salvia. We've had them be perennial for us pretty reliably. We planted a couple last year, almost as a trial, and then this year we've planted several of the Lake series ones. And again, we'll see them in the upcoming video, all planted, clustered together. And I'll wrap this tour up with this nandina. So again, a relative over here of that mahonia in that container. This is a variegated firepower-like nandina, and firepower has these kind of interesting crinkly leaves on it. This is not an invasive nandina. It doesn't flower. Firepower is known for being like this really compact habit like this, but then turns bright red in the wintertime. And this one does that as well. This one's called Atafuku. Is that right? Yeah, Atafuku. And it's variegated. So when it does that bright red coloration through the winter, every leaf on it turns really bright red. But then when this one comes back out of that, it exposes this variegated leaf, and the leaves on it are variegated during the season. It's leaning a little bit forward. We're starting to transition back to a little more shade as we get back toward the back line back here, and I can see that it probably would like just a bit more sun. And these firepower like Nandinas, and there's a few of them out on the market. Again, they have, if you know this look of this particular Nandina, you know what I mean. It's got this crinkly looking leaf on it. They definitely require winter sun to turn bright red. So that's the important thing, is you make sure it doesn't necessarily need full sun through the summer, but it definitely needs full sun in the winter in order to get that really vivid red pop of color during the winter months. So there you go. We went whatever amount of feet that is along this screen, and we'll continue from here, either heading back or we'll jump to some other section here. We're well into the back garden now. So thank you very much for following along with it.